Pocus on the eyeball. Is it worth your time? Maybe so. Hey friends, welcome back to the Journal Feed. My name is Nick Zelt, and this is the only place to get spoon-fed the latest and greatest of emergency medicine. This is the audio version of the past week summaries, which this week were brought to you, were written by our authors, Ketan Patel, Shannon Marcus, Jonathan Brewer, Joshua Belfer, Vivian Lay, and Clay Smith. So let's talk about the first article titled Device Damage and Malfunction During Dual Defibrillation or Dual Electric Cardioversions, a scoping review out of the journal Resuscitation. Dual sequential defibrillation has become very popular. And I'd be interested to know how often it's actually happening. One of the concerns with doing this as it gains popularity is that manufacturers of these defibrillation and cardioversion devices did not have this in mind when they designed them. And most of them, they recommend against it. And why do they do that? Because there is definitely concern that there could be damage to the devices. And indeed, the DOSE-VF trial, which is probably the best known trial on this subject, started out as a trial of dual simultaneous shocks, and then they switched to sequential because of concern for damage to the defibrillators themselves. So how often is this actually happening? How often are we damaging these devices? There was a fairly recent AFib trial that showed improved success with the dual sequential defibrillations, or cardioversions in that case actually, but the device malfunction rate was about 3 out of 118 shocks, which is higher than we'd like it to be. So this was a scoping review that looked at how often this is probably happening. It utilized 5 databases and the FDA's mode registry to try to dig up as many of these events as possible and seeing how often this happened. They were able to find 29 records of this happening from the study cohort, 5 from published sources and 24 from regulatory reports, anywhere from 2016 to 2026. What was often the case in these reports is that the device itself failed self-testing later on. And so the problem was not detected right away, but rather later because it went unnoticed. There were some reports of these devices ceasing to function during resuscitation as well, though. And if you've broken 2 machines, then I don't know if you have a third, your patient might be in trouble. Interestingly, most of the cases were seen with simultaneous shocks damaging the machines, so the switch of the DOSE-VF trial seems justified. In the MOD registry, it wasn't altogether clear exactly what the timings were, so some of them might have been still from sequential, but it's not totally clear. All of this is not from standardized reporting, and so all of this is probably likely underreported, and there's probably more cases of this out there in the wild. However, it does seem like rates might be somewhere around 2.5% per cardioversion done simultaneously. And this is a shame because as far as we can tell, simultaneous defibrillation seems to be better than sequential. So I expect that more defibrillators are probably going to be made to withstand this problem. Although we were still not getting recommendations for actually doing this, at least not from ILCOR. So maybe it won't become so regular practice anyways. In a spoonful, dual simultaneous, more than sequential, defibrillation does seem to damage machines, though at a relatively low rate. For now, it does seem prudent that you should do routine post-use device testing after any dual anything defibrillation before utilizing it for other patients. Then what you've been waiting for, the answer to your question, should we be focusing those eyeballs, specifically for retinal detachment? It's the third article. Titled, What is the Utility of Point-of-Care Ultrasound for Diagnosing Retinal Detachment? Out of the Journal of Emergency Medicine. Let's face it, it's hard to look at the back of someone's eye unless you have the right materials and you practice it. And quite frankly, emergency physicians don't generally have either of those things. But we do have POCUS machines, and eyeballs are pretty accessible with a POCUS machine. And retinal detachment is relatively easy to find, and it's a pretty superficial structure. It's right there. You're just looking for a squiggly eye inside the line that should not be there. So how accurate is it really? This was a review that looked at 3 different meta-analyses to try to kind of sum up and discuss how good POCUS is for retinal detachments. And it sums up to that they're actually pretty darn good. From the first meta-analysis, they looked at sensitivity of 97 to 100%, and specificity still quite high, 83 to 100%, which is really, really good. So positive likelihood ratio of almost 6 is wonderful. Another study, though, reported it as high as 12. A positive likelihood ratio of 12 is very good. This is going to significantly improve you thinking that this is the diagnosis. Another study showed a sensitivity of 94%, a specificity of still 96%, and a positive likelihood ratio of 25. These are really quite good test characteristics. Even a negative likelihood ratio of 0.06. This is going to be meaningful for your probability of this patient having that disease. Does that mean that these patients don't need to be immediately referred to ophthalmology if you don't see it on your POCUS? I'm going to leave that up to you. It depends on your diagnostic certainty. If you really don't think they have it, then potentially not. With a negative likelihood ratio of 0.06 and a low pretest probability, then they might not have it. Or maybe you're just going to be a lot less urgent. It depends. Though limitations are always going to be operator experience, the specialty, how often you actually do this, how much training do you have a good quality ultrasound machine? And then there's a lot of different reference standards within these studies for confirming that this is indeed the diagnosis. In one case, a CT was used as a reference standard. That's a bit odd, I think, for retinal detachment, but apparently that's a thing. Also, it does not give us all the information necessarily. We're still missing things like MAC on or MAC off evaluations. Those are not going to be nearly as accurate with POCUS. And if it's just a retinal tear, then that's also not going to be as accurate. So it's probably good that someone does look at the back of this person's eye at some point. All the same, before you call your ophthalmologist, if you can get your POCUS machine on there, you're going to sound a lot more competent when you speak with them on the phone. So in a spoonful, this is a great use of POCUS and isn't actually endorsed by ACEP as well. In a spoonful, POCUS is of great use when trying to identify retinal detachments, and it's endorsed by ACEP as well. Though other diagnoses cannot be ruled out by this method, you should never place a good history in physical. Otherwise, POCUS is still a useful tool. Now, if you were hearing this right now, then you are not a part of the members feed, and so you missed 3 articles from this past week. What were those articles about? Well, we talked about some variables that might increase your risks of mortality in necrotizing soft tissue infections. We talked about whether you should give 1 dose or 2 doses of dexamethasone for pediatric asthma, and what dose of rock are you giving? Is it high enough? Links to all the original articles can be found at journalfeed.org, or you can just follow the links in your show notes. Our goal here is for you to keep up the easy way to spoon feeding. Thank you.